The Sisters of Iluqui. In the lush, rolling hills of Iluqui, a small village tucked away from the chaos of the wider world, life was simple yet vibrant. The villagers thrived on the land's bounty, their days filled with farming, weaving, and storytelling under the shade of the great baobab tree at the village square. Iluqui was a place where traditions held firm, and beauty was celebrated with songs and dance. Among its inhabitants, two sisters, Aria and Lila, stood out, though for very different reasons. Aria, the elder sister, was the pride of Iluqui. Her beauty was the kind that poets would write about, her luminous skin glowing under the sun, and her long, dark hair flowing like a river in the wind. Her eyes sparkled with the radiance of the morning dew, and her smile could light up even the gloomiest day. It wasn't just her physical beauty. Aria had a natural grace that made every movement of hers seem like a dance, every word a melody. Villagers would often pause to admire her as she passed, showering her with compliments and gifts. Lila, on the other hand, lived in the shadow of her sister's radiance. As a child, a tragic accident had left her with scars that marred her once smooth skin. She had been playing in the kitchen when a boiling pot tipped over, splashing her face and arms with scalding water. Though her parents had done everything they could to save her, the scars were permanent. They crisscrossed her skin like an unwanted map, a stark reminder of that fateful day. Where Aria was confident and outgoing, Lila was shy and withdrawn. She avoided mirrors and crowds, preferring the solitude of the forest or the quiet stream where she could escape the whispers and pitying looks of the villagers. Though she longed for acceptance, she had learned to shrink herself, her voice barely more than a whisper, so as not to draw attention. Their parents, Abina and Kofi, loved their daughters, but it was evident to everyone that Aria held a special place in their hearts. They were proud of her beauty, often boasting about her to neighbors and visitors. Whenever the family entertained guests, Aria would be seated at the forefront, adorned in the finest clothes and jewelry, while Lila was relegated to the background or sent away on errands. "You must stay in the kitchen, Lila," her mother would often say. "We don't want to distract the guests." Though the words were spoken softly, they stung Lila deeply. She spent countless nights staring out of her small window, her heart heavy with sadness, as the sound of laughter and music from the main house filled the air. Aria, basking in the constant adoration, began to change. The compliments inflated her sense of self-worth, and she grew distant from her younger sister. She no longer sought Lila's company, preferring instead to surround herself with friends and admirers who fed her vanity. "Lila," Aria would say with a playful smirk, "you don't have to come to the village square with me. I'm sure you're happier staying here." Though the words were masked as kindness, Lila knew better. The pain of being excluded gnawed at her, but she swallowed her feelings, retreating further into her own world. Still, despite everything, Lila's heart remained kind. She helped with the household chores, often taking on the heavier burdens to spare her sister. She gathered firewood, fetched water, and tended to the goats, her days a blur of quiet labor. Though her family rarely acknowledged her efforts, the elders in the village often remarked on her diligence and good heart. "She may not be as beautiful as her sister," an old woman once said, "but Lila has a beauty of spirit that Aria could never match." Unbeknownst to Lila, her life was about to change. The challenges she faced would soon lead her on a journey of self-discovery, one that would reveal the strength and beauty that lay within her scarred exterior. But for now, she remained the quiet shadow to Aria's dazzling light, yearning for a day when she, too, would be seen and valued. The mysterious encounter. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden hues across the village of Iluqui. Lila, as usual, woke before the rest of her family. She tied a worn scarf around her head, grabbed the clay water pot, and began her quiet journey to the river. The path wound through the forest, alive with the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. This was her solace, a sanctuary where she felt free from the prying eyes and unkind whispers of the village. The river shimmered in the morning light, its gentle current reflecting the pastel hues of dawn. Lila knelt by the water, filling her pot with care, her thoughts drifting as the cool liquid spilled over her fingers. It was in moments like these that she felt most at peace, far away from the shadows of her sister's radiance and the weight of her scars. As she balanced the pot on her head and began the trek home, she noticed an old woman sitting by the side of the path. The woman's back was bent with age, and she struggled to carry 2 large baskets overflowing with fruit and herbs. Her face was etched with deep lines, her hands trembling as she adjusted the heavy load. "Child," the woman called weakly, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the forest. "Would you spare a moment to help an old woman?" Lila hesitated. Her own burden was not light, and the journey home was still long. Yet, something about the woman's frail figure and weary eyes stirred her heart. Setting her pot down carefully under a tree, she walked over to the woman. "Let me help you," Lila said gently. She lifted one of the baskets onto her head and offered her arm to the woman, who leaned on her for support. Together, they began walking. The old woman studied Lila as they moved. "You have a kind heart, my dear," she said after a moment. "Many passed me by this morning, pretending not to see my struggle. But you stopped." Lila shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. It was the right thing to do. No one should be left to struggle alone. The journey was longer than Lila anticipated. The woman's home lay deep within the forest, in a part of Ilukwi she had never ventured before. It was a small, humble hut, surrounded by a garden teeming with vibrant flowers and herbs. The old woman gestured for Lila to place the basket by the door. "You've done more for me than I can repay," the woman said, her voice filled with gratitude. "But I am not just an old woman. I am Nayana, a guardian of the forest and the keeper of unseen treasures." Lila's eyes widened in surprise, unsure whether to believe her. The old woman's frail exterior seemed to shimmer briefly, her presence growing more luminous. She raised her hand, and a soft golden light appeared, forming into a pendant shaped like a teardrop. It dangled from a delicate chain, glowing faintly as though it held the essence of the sunrise. "This is for you, child," Nayana said, placing the pendant in Lila's hands. "This is no ordinary ornament. It holds the power to reveal your true self, the beauty of your heart, the light of your spirit. Wear it, and you will shine in ways that others cannot ignore." Lila stared at the pendant, a mixture of wonder and disbelief in her eyes. "I don't understand. Why give this to me?" "Because you, my dear, have the rarest kind of beauty. You see beyond yourself, beyond what the world sees. This pendant will help others see what I already do." Nayana paused, her expression turning serious. "But beware, child. The pendant's power is not without limits. It reflects what lies within. Wear it with humility and kindness, and it will serve you well. Use it out of vanity or envy, and it may bring more sorrow than joy." Lila hesitated. I don't know if I deserve such a gift." Nayana smiled, her face softening. "That hesitation, that humility, is precisely why you do." With that, the old woman disappeared into the hut, leaving Lila alone in the garden. She stared at the pendant in her hand, the golden light flickering softly like a heartbeat. As she made her way back to the village, the pendant tucked safely under her scarf, Lila's mind raced. Was this truly a gift of magic? Could it change her life, or was it merely a test of her character? One thing was certain, her world had shifted in ways she could not yet comprehend. The pendant's secret. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm, golden glow over Ilukwi, Lila sat in her small room. She turned the golden pendant over in her hands, watching it catch the fading light. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic, but its weight in her palm felt heavier than it should. Nayana's words echoed in her mind, "Wear it with humility and kindness, and it will serve you well. Lila hesitated before finally slipping the pendant around her neck. The moment it rested against her chest, a strange sensation washed over her. A warmth that seemed to flow from the pendant into her very being. She glanced into the small, cracked mirror on her wall and gasped softly. Her reflection was different. The scars on her face, while still faintly visible, seemed less pronounced, softened as though hidden beneath a veil of radiant light. Her skin glowed faintly, and her eyes sparkled with a confidence she hadn't known in years. She touched her face, unsure if the transformation was real or a trick of her imagination. But the next morning, as she stepped outside to fetch water, she noticed the difference immediately. The usual indifference or pitying glances from the villagers were replaced with wide-eyed stares and whispers. "Is that Lila?" one woman murmured to her friend. "She looks different. Almost glowing." Children, who often ignored her, now ran up to greet her with smiles, and men paused their work to glance her way. Even the village elders, usually too preoccupied with their discussions under the baobab tree, turned their heads as she passed. Lila's parents noticed the change as well. Her mother, Abina, who rarely paid her much attention, called her into the kitchen that afternoon. "Lila, have you done something different with your hair?" she asked, her tone unusually warm. "You look brighter today." Her father, Kofi, nodded in agreement. "There's something about you, child. You're blooming." Lila smiled softly, unsure how to respond. The attention, though flattering, felt foreign and unsettling. For so long, she had been invisible, the scarred shadow of her sister, Aria. Now, for the first time, she was being seen, not for her scars, but for something more. That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the air was filled with chatter about the upcoming village harvest festival. Aria, as usual, dominated the conversation, describing the dress she planned to wear and the admirers she expected to charm. But tonight, the attention shifted unexpectedly. Kofi, glancing at Lila, asked, "Will you be attending the festival this year, Lila? You've been staying away for too long." Lila nearly dropped her spoon in surprise. Her parents had never once asked her to join such events. Even Aria looked startled, though her expression quickly turned to one of suspicion. "I don't think Lila enjoys festivals," Aria said with a small, forced smile. "She's always been more reserved." Lila looked down at her plate, unsure how to respond. Deep inside, she longed to attend the festival, to experience the joy and celebration that others seemed to take for granted. But the thought of facing the crowd, even with the pendant's glow, filled her with anxiety. The days that followed only heightened Lila's inner turmoil. Everywhere she went, people treated her differently. Women sought her advice on simple matters, men offered to carry her water pots, and children followed her around as though drawn to her light. Even the animals in the village seemed calmer in her presence. Yet, with the admiration came unease. Was this newfound attention truly for her, or was it merely the magic of the pendant? Did people now see the real Lila, or just a facade created by the pendant's power? The question plagued her most when Kale, the kind-hearted merchant, returned to Elukwi. Kale had always been polite to Lila, but like the others, he had never looked at her twice. Now, his gaze lingered as they exchanged greetings in the market. "You look radiant, Lila," he said, his voice sincere. "There's something about you that's enchanting." Lila's heart fluttered at his words, but doubt quickly crept in. Would he say that if I weren't wearing this pendant? She wondered. Kale began seeking her out, offering to walk her home from the market or help her with her errands. His warmth and attentiveness made Lila's days brighter, but her uncertainty only grew. She longed to believe his kindness was genuine, but the pendant's power cast a shadow over every interaction. As the harvest festival approached, the village buzzed with excitement. Aria, sensing the shift in attention, grew increasingly curious and jealous of her sister's transformation. One evening, she cornered Lila in their room. "What's going on with you?" Aria demanded, her tone sharp. "You've been acting strange, and now everyone is talking about you. What have you done?" Lila hesitated, clutching the pendant beneath her dress. "I haven't done anything, Aria. Maybe people are just seeing me differently." Aria narrowed her eyes. "You're hiding something. I can feel it. Don't think for a second that you can overshadow me, Lila. You've always been in the background, and that's where you belong." The words stung, but Lila remained silent. She knew Aria's reaction came from a place of insecurity, yet it didn't make the accusations hurt any less. The night before the festival, Lila stood before her small mirror, the pendant glowing faintly against her skin. She traced the scars on her face with trembling fingers. For years, they had been a source of shame, a barrier between her and the world. Now, with the pendant, she had a chance to step into the light, to be seen and appreciated. But at what cost? As she stared at her reflection, Nayana's warning echoed in her mind: use it with humility and kindness, or it may bring sorrow. The pendant was a gift, but it was also a test. And Lila knew she had to tread carefully if she wanted to hold on to the person she was beneath the glow. The festival would be her first real test. Would she step into the crowd with confidence, or would the pendant's power consume her, turning her into someone she no longer recognized? With a deep breath, Lila resolved to face the challenge. Whatever the outcome, she would hold on to the kindness and humility that had brought her this far. The pendant might enhance her light, but it was her heart that truly defined her. A suitor's heart. The Harvest Festival transformed the village of Elukwi into a vibrant tapestry of colors, music, and laughter. Lanterns hung from the baobab tree in the square, casting a warm glow over the crowd. The villagers dressed in their finest garments, eager to celebrate the season's bounty. It was the most anticipated event of the year, a time for joy, connection, and, often, the beginning of new romances. Lila stood at the edge of the square, clutching her shawl nervously. The golden pendant, hidden beneath the fabric of her dress, hung faintly against her chest, as though it could sense her apprehension. She had spent hours debating whether to come, fearing both the attention and the judgment. But her mother had insisted, for the first time encouraging her to attend. "You deserve to be seen, Lila," Abina had said, her tone surprisingly tender. With a deep breath, Lila stepped into the crowd. Kale had arrived in Elukwi just that morning, his cart filled with wares from distant lands. The young merchant was well known among the villagers, not just for his goods but for his warm demeanor and genuine interest in the people he met. Unlike other merchants who passed through the village, Kale took time to learn the stories of those he traded with, his curiosity extending far beyond commerce. As he navigated the bustling square, Kale's eyes landed on Lila. She stood near a food stall, her soft glow catching his attention like a beacon. Her movements were graceful, her smile shy but radiant. There was something about her presence that captivated him instantly. Kale approached her with a friendly smile. "Lila, isn't it?" he asked, offering a slight bow. Lila looked up, startled that he remembered her name. They had exchanged pleasantries in the past, but she had never imagined that someone like Kale would notice her in a crowd. "Yes," she replied softly. "Good evening, Kale." "You look different," he said, studying her with genuine curiosity. "There's a light in you tonight that I don't think I've ever seen before." Lila felt her cheeks flush, and she lowered her gaze. "Maybe it's just the festival," she said, trying to deflect. "It brings out the best in everyone." But Kale wasn't convinced. "No, it's more than that," he said, his voice warm. "You seem at peace. Like you found something within yourself." Lila's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that Kale was seeing beyond the pendant's magic? Or was he, like everyone else, enchanted by its glow? Aria, who had been holding court at the center of the square, noticed Kale speaking with Lila. Her smile faltered as she watched the two of them laugh and exchange stories. For the first time, she felt a pang of unease. Kale was the kind of man she would have expected to gravitate toward her, handsome, successful, and charming. Yet here he was, focused entirely on her sister. Aria's jealousy flared. She had always been the one in the spotlight, the one who turned heads and received admiration. The idea of Lila, her shy and scared sister, taking that away from her was unbearable. Determined not to be outdone, Aria devised a plan. Later that evening, she approached Kale as he stood near the musicians, watching the dancers with a thoughtful expression. "Good evening, Kale," she said, her voice as sweet as honey. Kale turned to her with a polite smile. "Good evening, Aria. You must be enjoying the festival," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Ilukwi has its charm, doesn't it?" "It does," Kale replied, his tone cordial but distant. "The people here are wonderful." Aria leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Especially some people, I imagine." She cast a glance toward Lila, who was speaking with a group of children near the lanterns. Kale followed her gaze but didn't take the bait. "Lila is remarkable," he said simply. "She has a kindness that's rare." Aria's smile tightened. "Kindness is admirable, of course. But beauty, charm, those are what make a lasting impression, don't you think?" Kale's brow furrowed slightly. "True beauty, I believe, is found in the heart," he said. "And I've yet to meet anyone with a heart as genuine as Lila's." Aria's cheeks burned with frustration, but she maintained her composure. "You're a man of deep thoughts, Kale. It's refreshing." She lingered a moment longer, trying to capture his attention with her wit and allure. But Kale's focus never wavered from Lila, and Aria eventually retreated, her mind racing with schemes to reclaim her place at the center of attention. Over the next few days, Kale and Lila spent more time together. He accompanied her to the stream, helped her carry firewood, and listened intently as she shared stories about her favorite spots in the forest. Lila found herself smiling more often, her confidence growing with every kind word and gesture from Kale. Yet, despite the joy he brought her, doubt lingered in her heart. Was his affection for her genuine, or was it dependence magic at work? She began to test him in small ways, removing the pendant during their conversations or wearing it beneath her clothes so its glow was hidden. To her surprise, Kale's behavior didn't change. He still sought her out, still listened with rapt attention, still treated her as though she were the most important person in the world. One evening, as they sat by the river watching the sunset, Kale turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Lila, do you know what I admire most about you?" She shook her head, unsure how to respond. "It's not just your beauty, though it's undeniable," he said. "It's your spirit. You have a quiet strength, a warmth that draws people in. It's something no pendant or magic could ever create." Lila's breath caught. Had he guessed her secret? She opened her mouth to speak, but Kale reached out and gently took her hand. "Whatever it is you're afraid of," he said softly, "know that it doesn't change how I see you. You're extraordinary, Lila, inside and out." Tears welled in Lila's eyes. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as a glowing figure or a bearer of scars, but as herself. Kale's words planted a seed of hope in her heart, but they also deepened her resolve to confront the pendant's power and ensure that her future was built on truth, not illusion. The test of humility. The moonlight bathed Ilukwi in a silvery glow, the village quiet save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Lila lay in her small bed, the golden pendant resting on her nightstand. She had taken to removing it at night, as though doing so might give her clarity about its effect. Her thoughts were a tangled web of emotions, joy at Kale's attentions, fear of the pendant's influence, and an underlying unease about the path ahead. As she drifted into sleep, a familiar warmth enveloped her, and the world around her began to shift. She found herself standing in a lush forest, the air thick with the scent of flowers and the sound of birdsong. Before her stood the old woman, Naina, her eyes wise and piercing. "Child," Naina said, her voice echoing softly, "you have embraced the pendant's power, but do you understand its weight?" Lila bowed her head, her voice trembling. "I've tried to use it wisely, but I fear I've let it change how others see me. I don't know if their kindness is real or if it's just the magic." Naina stepped closer, her gaze stern but not unkind. "The pendant reflects what is already within you, Lila. It amplifies your light, but it does not create it. Yet beware, if your heart is clouded by vanity or pride, the light will turn against you. Beauty without humility is a flame that burns too brightly, consuming all in its path." Lila felt a chill run through her. How can I be sure of who I am, or who loves me for me? Naina reached out and touched Lila's shoulder, her touch warm and grounding. "Test the bonds you hold dear. Remove the mask of the pendant and see who remains by your side. Only then will you find the truth." The dream began to fade, and Naina's final words echoed in the distance, "Remember, child, true beauty shines brightest in those who carry it humbly." Lila awoke with a start, Naina's words still ringing in her ears. She looked over at the pendant, its golden surface glinting faintly in the early morning light. For the first time since receiving it, she felt an overwhelming urge to step away from its power and face the world as her unadorned self. That day, Lila tucked the pendant away in a small wooden box and left it at home. As she walked through the village, she braced herself for the familiar stares and whispers that had once been her constant companions. But to her surprise, while some villagers glanced at her curiously, others greeted her warmly, as though her absence of radiance had not dimmed her worth in their eyes. When she met Kale by the river, she searched his face for any sign of disappointment. To her relief, his smile was as genuine as ever. "You seem quieter today," Kale remarked, his tone light but observant. "Is something on your mind?" Lila hesitated, then decided to test the waters. "Do you think I've changed, Kale?" He tilted his head, considering her question. "You've grown more confident, I think. There's a lightness in you that wasn't there before. But it's not your appearance that's changed, it's the way you carry yourself." Lila's heart swelled with hope. "You're sure? You don't think it's something else?" Kale chuckled, his eyes warm. "Lila, I've always seen you as someone remarkable. If anything, the world is just catching up to what I've known all along." Her chest tightened with emotion, but she kept her composure, determined to continue testing his sincerity in the days to come. Meanwhile, Aria's jealousy had reached a boiling point. She had noticed Lila's quiet withdrawal of the pendant's power and interpreted it as a sign of weakness. Determined to reclaim her position as the center of attention, she began observing her sister more closely, convinced that there was a secret behind Lila's transformation. Late one night, as the household slept, Aria crept into Lila's room. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the small wooden box on Lila's dresser. Aria's breath quickened as she opened it, revealing the golden pendant nestled inside. Its glow was faint, but even in the dim light, it exuded a sense of power. "So this is it," Aria whispered, her fingers brushing against the pendant. "This is what's been making her so irresistible." A wicked smile spread across her face. "Let's see if this magic works for me." Aria slipped the pendant around her neck and felt an immediate surge of warmth. She looked into the small mirror on Lila's dresser and gasped. Her reflection was stunning, her features sharper, her skin luminous, her eyes bright with an almost otherworldly allure. For a moment, she was transfixed, imagining the adoration and envy she would command. But as she gazed at her reflection, the warmth turned to a prickling heat, then to an unbearable burning. Aria cried out, tearing the pendant from her neck and flinging it across the room. The glow faded instantly, leaving her panting and clutching her chest. Unbeknownst to Aria, Lila had been stirred awake by the commotion. She sat up, her heart sinking as she saw the pendant lying on the floor. "Aria," Lila said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Aria spun around, her face a mask of guilt and defiance. "You've been hiding this from everyone," she spat. "Using it to make yourself look better. I just wanted to see if it worked." Lila stepped forward, her voice firm but calm. "It's not a toy, Aria. It's a gift, but it comes with a cost. You shouldn't have touched it." Aria glared at her, but the burn on her pride was more painful than anything else. Without another word, she stormed out of the room, leaving Lila to pick up the pendant and cradle it in her hands. As she returned it to the box, Lila's resolve hardened. She would no longer rely on the pendant to define her worth. If she was to face the world, she would do so as her true self, scars and all. Nayana's warning had been clear, and she would not let vanity or pride undo her. The Festival of Fire. The village of Ilukwi buzzed with excitement as the annual Festival of Fire approached. It was the grandest event of the year, a time to celebrate renewal, gratitude, and the blessings of the land. Lanterns made from dyed silk adorned the pathways, and bonfires were built in the village square, ready to be lit in a symbolic act of purification and hope. The air was filled with the scent of roasted yams, spiced meats, and the sweet aroma of tamarind cakes. For Lila, the thought of attending the festival was daunting. Though she had begun to find her confidence, the idea of being at the center of a crowd still made her uneasy. After much deliberation, she decided to wear the pendant, hoping it would lend her the courage she needed to face the evening. When Lila stepped into the square, the pendant nestled beneath the fold of her simple dress. The transformation was immediate. Heads turned as she walked through the crowd, her glow subtle but magnetic. Her scars, though still faintly visible, seemed to enhance rather than detract from her appearance, adding a depth to her beauty that left many speechless. "Is that Lila?" one of the elders whispered, leaning toward his wife. "She looks radiant." Children ran to greet her, tugging at her hands to dance with them. Women complimented her on her grace, and men offered her smiles and greetings that were warm and genuine. The once quiet girl who had lived in the shadow of her sister now stood as the evening star, her presence captivating everyone around her. Kale, who had been helping set up the festival, paused mid-task when he saw her. His smile widened, and he made his way through the crowd to her side. "You're breathtaking tonight," he said, his voice filled with awe. Lila felt her cheeks flush, and she looked down, embarrassed. "It's just the festival," she murmured. "Everything feels magical tonight." Kale shook his head. "No, it's you, Lila. The festival's charm pales in comparison." His words warmed her heart, but the pendant's faint hum against her chest reminded her of its presence. Was Kale truly captivated by her, or was it the magic enhancing her aura? The question gnawed at her, even as she smiled and allowed him to guide her toward the dancing circle. Aria arrived at the festival shortly after, dressed in a stunning gown of crimson and gold, her hair adorned with delicate beads. She had spent hours preparing, determined to outshine everyone else, as she always had. But as she entered the square, her confidence wavered. The crowd's attention wasn't on her, it was on Lila. She watched as her sister moved gracefully among the villagers, her laughter light and her smile radiant. Even Kale, the man Aria had tried so hard to charm, was at Lila's side, his admiration evident in the way he looked at her. Aria's stomach churned with a mix of jealousy and disbelief. This was not the quiet, awkward sister she had grown up with. This was someone new. Someone confident, adored, and undeniably beautiful. Her suspicions from the night she had touched the pendant resurfaced. It has to be the pendant, she thought. There's no other explanation. Determined to confirm her theory, Aria approached the group where Lila and Kale stood. Her smile was wide but strained as she greeted them. "Lila," she said sweetly, though her tone carried an edge. "You're quite the star tonight. What's your secret?" Lila tensed, her hand instinctively brushing against the pendant hidden beneath her dress. "No secret," she replied softly. "I suppose it's just a good night." Kale interjected, his tone protective. "Lila has always been remarkable, Aria. It's just that now, people are finally noticing." Aria's smile faltered, and she forced a laugh. "Of course. It's wonderful to see you getting attention, sister. You deserve it." But inside, Aria ceded. The transformation was too sudden, too unnatural. She vowed to uncover the truth and reclaim the attention that she believed was rightfully hers. As the evening wore on, the festival reached its climax. The bonfires were lit, their flames roaring into the night sky, symbolizing the burning away of old grievances and the welcoming of new beginnings. Villagers danced around the fires, their movements wild and joyous, the heat of the flames warming their spirits. Lila found herself swept into the dance, Kale by her side. For the first time in years, she felt truly free, free from the weight of her scars, free from the shadows of insecurity. The warmth of the fire seemed to echo the warmth in her heart, and she allowed herself to bask in the moment. But as she danced, she caught sight of Aria standing at the edge of the square, her expression dark and unreadable. Lila's joy faltered, and the hum of the pendant grew louder in her mind, a reminder of the uneasy balance she was walking. Later that night, as the festival began to wind down, Lila stood by the river, reflecting on the evening. Kale joined her, his presence comforting in the quiet. "You were incredible tonight," he said softly. "I've never seen you so alive." Lila hesitated, her fingers brushing against the pendant. "Kale, do you ever wonder why people change so suddenly?" He tilted his head, sensing the weight behind her words. "Change can come from many places, growth, pain, or even magic. But true change comes from within." "Why do you ask?" Lila bit her lip, debating whether to confide in him. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps behind them made her turn. It was Aria, her eyes glinting with a mix of anger and desperation. "Lila," she said, her voice sharp. "We need to talk. Now." The act of betrayal. The night of the Festival of Fire had been both illuminating and tormenting for Aria. She lay awake in her room, her thoughts racing with anger and envy. The image of Lila glowing with confidence, adored by the villagers, haunted her. It was a stark contrast to the attention Aria had once taken for granted, and she could not bear the shift in their roles. Her mind returned to the pendant she had discovered in Lila's room. Though she had felt its power briefly and painfully, she was convinced that it was the source of her sister's transformation. If she could wield it properly, she reasoned, she could reclaim her rightful place as the village's star. The theft. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the household was still, Aria crept from her room. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slipped into Lila's room, careful not to wake her. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting faint shadows over the small wooden box on Lila's dresser. Aria opened the box and stared at the golden pendant inside. Its faint glow seemed almost alive, as if it were aware of her presence. Ignoring the unease creeping up her spine, she picked it up and fastened it around her neck. The warmth returned instantly, but this time, Aria braced herself. "It's just power," she whispered, clutching the pendant. "I deserve this." Satisfied, she left the room and returned to her own, eager to see the effects of the pendant the next day. The market. Morning came quickly, and Aria prepared herself with meticulous care. She donned her finest dress and adorned her hair with beads, ensuring she looked her best. The pendant hung prominently around her neck, its golden glow undeniable. As she stepped into the bustling market, she expected heads to turn, villagers to stop in their tracks, and admiration to pour in. At first, it seemed to work. A few villagers glanced her way, their eyes widening in surprise. Aria smiled triumphantly, convinced of her success. But as she continued to walk, an uncomfortable sensation began to build. The warmth of the pendant grew hotter, spreading across her chest and up her neck. She paused, frowning, and wiped her brow. "It's just the sun," she muttered, though the heat felt far more intense than a sunny morning should allow. The villagers' expressions began to shift. What had initially been curiosity turned to confusion, then alarm. Whispers spread like wildfire through the market. "What's happening to her? Is that Aria? Look at her face." Aria's confidence wavered as she noticed the stares. She touched her cheek and felt a sharp sting, as if her skin were burning. Panic set in as the heat from the pendant became unbearable, searing into her chest like fire. She stumbled to a nearby stall, gripping the edge for support. "Help me," she gasped, her voice trembling. The merchant recoiled, pointing at her reflection in a polished brass plate. Aria turned to look and froze. Her once perfect skin was now marked with angry, red scars, spreading like cracks across her face and neck. The pendant's glow dimmed, and she realized with horror that it had turned against her. The revelation. By now, a crowd had gathered, their murmurs growing louder. Aria clutched the pendant, trying to remove it, but it seemed to resist her efforts, its chain tightening as if punishing her for her envy and pride. "What's happening to her?" someone asked. "It's the pendant," another whispered. "It's cursed." At that moment, Lila arrived, having heard the commotion from home. She pushed through the crowd, her heart sinking when she saw her sister's condition. "Aria!" Lila cried, rushing to her side. "What have you done?" Aria turned to her sister, tears streaming down her scarred face. I just wanted what you had," she choked out. "I wanted them to love me again." Lila's gaze softened, her anger melting into compassion. "The pendant isn't meant for envy or pride," she said gently. "It reflects what's in your heart. It doesn't create beauty, it reveals it." Aria's sobs grew louder, and she sank to the ground. The pendant finally released its hold, falling to the dirt with a dull thud. Its glow was gone, its power seemingly extinguished. The aftermath. The villagers stood in stunned silence, watching as Lila knelt beside her sister. Instead of berating Aria, Lila wrapped her arms around her, whispering words of comfort. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Aria wept. "I was so jealous of you, of how everyone looked at you. I didn't think about what I was doing." Lila helped her to her feet, her voice steady and kind. "You don't need a pendant to be loved, Aria. True beauty comes from kindness, not from magic or appearances." The crowd, moved by Lila's forgiveness, began to murmur words of support. "Lila's right," one woman said. "It's time we saw each other for who we are, not just how we look." That evening, Lila returned the pendant to Nayana's shrine deep in the forest, where she had first received it. As she placed it on the altar, she felt a sense of closure, knowing that her journey with the pendant had come to an end. Aria, scarred but humbled, began to rebuild her relationships with the villagers and her sister. She learned to see beyond the superficial and embrace the deeper qualities that truly mattered. And as for Lila, she continued to shine, not with the magic of the pendant, but with the light of her heart, which had always been her greatest gift. The revelation. The house was unusually quiet as Lila returned from the market later that afternoon. She had left earlier than planned after hearing whispers about Aria's public humiliation. Though no one had explicitly mentioned the pendant, the descriptions of what had happened left no doubt in Lila's mind. Anxiety gripped her as she approached the house, dreading what she might find. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Lila found Aria in their shared room, slumped on the floor beside her bed. Her once pristine face was streaked with tears, and the scars left by the pendant's betrayal burned an angry red across her cheeks and neck. The golden pendant lay discarded on the ground, its glow completely extinguished. Aria flinched as Lila entered, trying to hide her face. "Go away," she whispered hoarsely. "You've won. You've always won." Lila knelt beside her sister, her heart torn. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, anger at Aria for stealing the pendant, for her jealousy, and for her selfishness. But as she looked at her sister's trembling form, the anger gave way to compassion. "Let me help you," Lila said softly, reaching for a cloth and a bowl of water. "Your wounds need tending." "I don't deserve your help," Aria snapped, though her voice lacked its usual venom. I tried to take it from you. I wanted to be better than you." "You don't need to be better than me, Aria," Lila replied, her voice steady. "You just need to be yourself." She dipped the cloth into the water and gently dabbed at Aria's face. Aria winced but didn't pull away, too drained to resist. As Lila walked, she spoke with quiet understanding. "I've always admired you, you know," Lila admitted. "Your confidence, your charm. I thought you had everything I could never have. But I didn't realize how much pressure you must have felt to be perfect all the time." Aria's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. Everyone loved me because of how I looked. It was all I had. When they started looking at you, I didn't know who I was without it." Lila paused, her hands still. "We're more than how we look, Aria. The pendant didn't make me better, it only showed what was already there. I think you're starting to see that for yourself now." Naena's return. As Lila finished tending to Aria's wounds, the room grew eerily still. A soft, golden light filled the space, and Lila turned to see the old woman, Naena, standing by the doorway. Her presence was both calming and commanding, and her gaze settled on the two sisters. "You've learned a hard lesson today," Naena said, her voice resonating with quiet power. "The pendant reflects the soul of its wearer. Its magic is neither good nor evil, it simply amplifies what is already within. For one who carries kindness and humility, it brings light. For one consumed by envy and pride, it reveals the darkness." Aria looked down, shame flooding her face. I thought it would make me beautiful again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Naena's expression softened, and she stepped closer. "Beauty is not in the face, child, but in the heart. You have spent so much time seeking validation from others that you've forgotten to see yourself. True beauty comes from embracing who you are, flaws and all." She turned to Lila, her eyes filled with approval. "And you, child, have shown the strength of your heart. Your forgiveness and compassion have healed wounds far deeper than those on the surface. But remember this, the pendant is a tool, not a crutch. Its power is not meant to define you, but to guide you toward understanding your true self." Lila nodded, feeling a sense of closure as Naena's words sank in. "I don't need it anymore," she said quietly. "I want to return it." Naena smiled faintly. "It was always meant to be temporary. Its journey with you is complete." With a wave of her hand, the pendant rose from the ground and dissolved into a shimmer of golden light, vanishing into the air. The room felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. A new beginning. As Naena's light faded, Aria reached for Lila's hand. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. For everything, for the pendant, for how I've treated you, for all of it. Lila squeezed her sister's hand, her own eyes filling with tears. I forgave you a long time ago, Aria. We've both made mistakes, but we are still sisters. We can move forward together. The two embraced, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured. The weight of jealousy and insecurity no longer hung between them, replaced by a newfound understanding and love. The village's reaction. Over the days that followed, the villagers learned of what had transpired. To Lila's surprise, many expressed admiration for her courage and kindness, while others extended sympathy to Aria as she began her journey of self-acceptance. Kale, ever supportive, stood by Lila's side, affirming his love for her, not for her appearance or any magic, but for her heart. Lila, he said one evening, as they watched the sunset by the river, you've always been more than enough. With or without the pendant, you shine. For the first time, Lila believed him completely. Lessons in forgiveness. The days following the Festival of Fire were a turning point for Aria. Her scars, though healing, served as a constant reminder of the consequences of her envy and pride. For the first time in her life, Aria found herself out of the spotlight, her beauty no longer a shield to hide behind. She had to confront not only how others perceived her but also how she had treated those around her, especially Lila. Aria's reflection. One morning, Aria stood before the small mirror in her room, tracing the faint lines of the scars on her face. The reflection staring back at her was no longer the flawless image she had once cherished. At first, she had avoided mirrors altogether, unable to bear the sight of her altered appearance. But as time passed, she began to see more than the scars. She saw the pain she had caused, the jealousy that had consumed her, and the emptiness that had driven her to such desperate lengths. I let it define me, she whispered to herself. I let beauty become the only thing I thought I had. Aria's thoughts often turned to Lila. Despite all the cruelty and dismissal Aria had shown her, Lila had chosen compassion over condemnation. That realization humbled her more than anything else. Determined to make amends, Aria sought out small ways to show her regret. She helped with household chores she had once avoided, offered kind words to villagers she had previously ignored, and, most importantly, began speaking with Lila in a way she never had before, gently, sincerely, without pretense. Lila's growth. For Lila, life after the pendant was a revelation. Without its glow, she felt more vulnerable but also freer. She no longer worried about whether the admiration she received was real or magical. Kale's steadfast support played a significant role in her growing confidence. You've always been remarkable, Lila, Kale told her one evening as they walked by the river. But I think you're starting to see it for yourself now. That's what matters most. Lila smiled, his words filling her with warmth. It was true. She had spent so much of her life hiding, believing she was unworthy of love or respect. But the journey with the pendant had taught her that her worth was not tied to her scars or the opinions of others, it was something intrinsic, something no one could take away. She began to hold her head higher, to speak with more certainty, and to embrace the parts of herself she had once tried to conceal. Her days became brighter, not because of any magic, but because she had learned to see the beauty in her own heart. Rebuilding trust. One afternoon, as the sun cast dappled light through the trees, Aria approached Lila, who was tending to the small herb garden behind their house. The tension that had once defined their interactions was absent, replaced by a tentative peace. Lila, Aria began, her voice hesitant. Can I talk to you? Lila looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. Of course. Aria sat down beside her on the low stone wall surrounding the garden. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I don't know where to start. I've been awful to you for so long. I was jealous, insecure, and I let those feelings control me. I thought if I made you feel smaller, I'd feel bigger. But all I did was hurt you, and myself. Lila listened quietly, her heart aching for the sister who had spent so much of her life trapped by her own fears. Aria, she said softly, I've already forgiven you. Holding on to anger wouldn't change the past. What matters is what we do now. Aria's eyes filled with tears. You're a better person than I've ever been, Lila. That's not true, Lila replied, placing a hand on her sister's. You're learning, and that's what matters. We've both made mistakes, but we are still sisters. We can start over. Aria nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Small steps. The sisters began spending more time together, slowly mending their relationship. They shared stories from their childhood, worked together on household tasks, and even laughed about old memories that had once been tinged with bitterness. One day, as they prepared a meal together, Aria paused and looked at Lila. Do you remember when we used to climb the baobab tree by the river? Lila chuckled. And you always got stuck halfway up. Aria laughed, shaking her head. I was trying to keep up with you. You were fearless back then. I think I forgot that for a while, Lila admitted. But maybe I'm finding it again. Aria smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. I think you are. The village notices. The villagers, too, noticed the change in both sisters. They saw Aria's newfound humility and kindness, and they admired Lila's growing confidence and grace. Conversations about the sisters shifted from gossip to praise, as the community began to appreciate the strength and growth both women had demonstrated. Even the elders remarked on the transformation. It's a lesson for all of us, one said. Beauty fades, but character endures. These girls are teaching us that. The bond renewed. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Lila and Aria grew stronger. They were no longer rivals or strangers living under the same roof. They were sisters in the truest sense, supporting each other, learning from one another, and facing the world together. For Lila, the journey had been one of self-discovery. For Aria, it had been one of redemption. And for both, it had been a lesson in the power of forgiveness, not just forgiving others, but also forgiving themselves. The village's judgment. The news of Aria's transformation and the mysterious pendant spread quickly through the village of Ilukwi. Whispers echoed in the marketplace, under the baobab tree, and in the fields as the villagers pieced together the story. The pendant's magical powers, Lila's newfound confidence, and Aria's dramatic downfall became the subject of spirited debate. A divided reaction. At the heart of the discussions was a question that resonated deeply with everyone: what truly defines beauty? Some villagers expressed admiration for Lila, praising her strength and humility. She didn't let the pendant define her, said one elder. Instead, she used it as a tool to find herself. That's true courage. Others, however, were quick to judge Aria harshly. She let her jealousy ruin her, muttered a woman at the market. Her beauty was all she had, and when it faded, so did she. But not everyone saw Aria in such a negative light. Some sympathized with her plight, recognizing the pressure she had faced. Imagine living with the weight of everyone's expectations, a young man said. She was adored for her looks, but no one cared about who she was inside. These differing opinions created a divide in the village, with some seeing the story as a cautionary tale about vanity and others as a reflection of the community's own superficial values. Aria faces the community. For Aria, facing the village was an ordeal. She had spent most of her life basking in admiration, but now she walked through the streets feeling the sting of stares and whispers. The scars on her face were healing, but the shame she carried was far deeper. One afternoon, As she walked to the market, she overheard two women speaking in hushed tones. "Did you see her?" "That's Aria," one whispered. "The one who used the pendant and got burned." Aria paused, her heart sinking. But instead of running away, she turned to face them. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm Aria. I made mistakes, and I've paid for them. But I'm trying to be better." The women looked startled, then ashamed of their gossip. One of them nodded hesitantly. "It takes courage to admit that," she said. The encounter, though brief, marked a turning point for Aria. She began to hold her head higher, determined to prove through her actions that she was more than her past mistakes. Lila earns respect. Meanwhile, Lila found herself in an unfamiliar position at the center of admiration. Villagers who had once ignored her now sought her out, not because of the pendant's magic, but because of her resilience and kindness. One day, an elder approached her in the square. "Lila," he said, his voice warm, "you've shown us all what true strength looks like. It's not in how you look or what you have, but in how you carry yourself." Lila smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "But I couldn't have done it alone. I had help, from Kale, from my family, and even from Aria." The elder nodded thoughtfully. "And that's another lesson for us all. None of us stand alone." Conversations under the baobab tree. As the weeks passed, the story of the sisters became a catalyst for reflection and change within the village. Under the shade of the baobab tree, the elders held a special gathering to discuss the lessons learned. "Beauty is fleeting," one elder said, addressing the crowd. "But kindness, humility, and character endure. We've seen it in Lila, who found her strength, and even in Aria, who is working to make amends." Another elder added, "Perhaps we, too, are to blame. We place so much value on appearances that we forgot to look deeper. Let this be a reminder to treat each other with more care." The villagers nodded in agreement, their perspective shifting as they recognized their own role in fostering the superficial values that had caused so much pain. A new chapter for the sisters. The judgment of the village, while painful, became a catalyst for healing for both Lila and Aria. Lila continued to grow in confidence, supported by the love and respect of the community. Kale remained by her side, their bond deepening with each passing day. For Aria, the path was more challenging. She had to earn back the trust and respect she had lost, not through words but through actions. She began volunteering to help with village tasks, from tending the fields to assisting the elderly. Slowly, the villagers began to see her in a new light. Not as the vain beauty she had once been, but as someone who was learning to embrace humility and kindness, the village's transformation. By the time the next festival of fire approached, the village of Ilukwi had changed. The story of the sisters and the pendant became a tale passed down among the villagers, not as a story of magic, but as a lesson in values. Young or old, beautiful or plain, an elder would say, "What matters is the light within you. That's the light that truly shines." The bond rebuilt. The sun was just beginning to rise over the lush hills of Ilukwi, casting soft golden light across the village. Lila stood at the edge of the forest, the pendant cradled in her hands. Its glow had long since faded, but she still felt its weight, not the physical weight, but the significance of what it had represented in her journey. Today, she would return it to where it belonged. Aria appeared behind her, carrying a small basket. She had insisted on accompanying Lila, despite her initial hesitation. "Are you sure you want to come?" Lila asked gently. Aria nodded, her expression earnest. "I need to do this. For both of us." Lila smiled faintly, appreciating her sister's courage. Together, they stepped into the forest, the path to Nayana's shrine winding through towering trees and patches of sunlight. The journey to the shrine. The sisters walked in silence at first, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional call of a bird. Lila could sense Aria's unease but chose to let her speak when she was ready. After a while, Aria broke the silence. "Lila," she said, her voice tentative, "I've been thinking about everything that happened. About the pendant, the village, and us." Lila glanced at her sister, encouraging her to continue. "I'm so sorry for the way I treated you," Aria said, her voice thick with emotion. "For years, I let my jealousy and insecurities control me. I saw your kindness as weakness and thought I had to tear you down to feel important. But I was wrong. So wrong." Lila stopped walking and turned to face her sister. "Aria, I've already forgiven you. I think the person you need to forgive most is yourself." Aria blinked back tears. "I'm trying. It's hard, but I'm trying." Lila reached out and took her sister's hand. "That's all that matters. We're in this together." With renewed resolve, they continued their journey, the bond between them stronger than it had ever been. Naena's return. When they arrived at the shrine, the clearing seemed alive with light, as if it were welcoming them. Lila stepped forward and placed the pendant on the stone altar at the center, her movements reverent. As she did, a soft golden glow filled the air, and Naena appeared, her presence as radiant and calming as before. She looked at the sisters with a knowing smile. "You've come far," Naena said, her voice resonating with warmth. "Both of you." Lila bowed her head. "The pendant showed me what I needed to see, but I no longer need it. I've learned that my worth isn't tied to how others see me, it's in how I see myself." Naena nodded, her expression approving. "You have grown wise, child. The pendant was a tool, nothing more. It helped you uncover the light within, but that light was always yours." She turned to Aria, who stood hesitantly at Lila's side. "And you, child? What have you learned?" Aria swallowed hard, her gaze dropping. "I learned that beauty isn't everything," she said softly. "I thought it was all I had, but I see now how shallow that was. I hurt Lila because I couldn't see beyond myself. I'm ashamed of how I acted." Naena stepped closer, her gaze gentle but firm. "Shame can be a powerful teacher, but it is not meant to be a permanent burden. You have taken the first steps toward change, and that is commendable." Aria looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "Can you forgive me?" Naena smiled. "It is not my forgiveness you need, child. It is your own. True change begins when you learn to see yourself not as you were, but as you wish to be." Words of wisdom. Naena turned to both sisters, her voice growing resonant, as though carried by the wind itself. Physical beauty is like the bloom of a flower, vivid and enchanting, but fleeting. It fades with time, as all things do. What endures is the beauty of the heart, the kindness we show to others, and the love we carry within ourselves. She gestured to the pendant on the altar, now glowing faintly. This pendant is a reflection of the soul. It amplifies what is already there, whether it be light or darkness. But true strength lies in not needing such tools to see your worth. That is the lesson you both have learned. The sisters nodded, their hearts filled with gratitude and understanding. Naena continued, her tone softening. "Go forward, children, and let your actions speak of the lessons you've learned. Let your hearts shine, for they are more powerful than any magic." With those final words, the golden light enveloped the pendant, and it dissolved into shimmering particles that scattered into the air, leaving the altar empty but radiant. A new beginning. As Lila and Aria made their way back to the village, the weight of the past seemed to lift. They walked side by side, their steps in sync, their bond renewed. For Lila, the journey had been one of self-discovery, showing her the power of inner strength and self-worth. For Aria, it was a path of redemption, teaching her the value of humility and kindness. When they arrived home, the village greeted them warmly. The sisters had become symbols of transformation and resilience, their story inspiring others to look beyond appearances and embrace the beauty within. And so, the sisters began a new chapter, not as rivals, but as allies, united by love, strengthened by their journey, and ready to face whatever the future held together. A new beginning. The village of Elukwi woke to a new dawn, its golden light bathing the fields and rooftops in warmth. For Lila and Aria, it felt like the start of a new chapter, not just for them, but for their family and the community they called home. Their journey had been fraught with trials, but they had emerged stronger and closer than ever before. A proposal by the river. Lila stood by the riverbank one late afternoon, the soft rush of water soothing her. The place had become a sanctuary for her, a spot where she could reflect on how far she had come. She didn't hear Kale approach until he spoke, his voice warm and familiar. "This spot suits you," he said, smiling as he stepped closer. Lila turned to him, her heart lifting at the sight of his kind eyes. "It's peaceful here," she replied. "It reminds me of how small troubles feel when you're surrounded by something so vast." Kale chuckled softly. "Wise as always." He took her hands in his expression turning serious but tender. "Lila, I've admired you from the moment we met, not just for your kindness, but for your strength. You face so much and come out shining, not because of any magic, but because of who you are." Lila felt her breath catch, emotion welling up inside her. Kale knelt, pulling a small, carved wooden box from his pocket. Inside was a simple but beautiful silver ring, its single gemstone catching the fading sunlight. "Lila," he said, his voice steady, "will you marry me? I want to spend my life with you, not because of what others see, but because of the beauty I see in your heart." Tears streamed down Lila's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Kale. 1,000 times, yes." The two embraced, their love for each other unshaken and pure. The river, the trees, and the world around them seemed to hum with quiet joy, as if bearing witness to their union. The village celebration. News of the engagement spread quickly, and the village decided to host a celebration in honor of the sisters' reconciliation and Lila's upcoming wedding. The village square, still adorned with the decorations from the Festival of Fire, came alive again with music, food, and laughter. Aria played a pivotal role in organizing the event, eager to show her love for her sister in a way she hadn't before. She worked tirelessly, ensuring every detail was perfect. When the day arrived, her efforts paid off. The square was a vibrant, joyful scene, filled with villagers eager to share in the happiness. During the celebration, Aria took a moment to speak to the gathered crowd. "I want to thank all of you for your kindness and forgiveness," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've made many mistakes, and I'm still learning. But my sister, Lila, has taught me the most important lesson of all, that true beauty lies within, and it shines brightest in those who live with kindness and integrity." The villagers erupted in applause, many moved by Aria's humility and honesty. Lila, standing beside her, hugged her tightly, their bond stronger than ever. The lesson of Elukwi. As the evening wore on, the elders gathered under the great baobab tree, reflecting on the journey of the two sisters. Their tale had become a symbol of hope and transformation, a story passed down to remind future generations of the village's hard-earned wisdom. "Envy and pride can blind us," one elder said, addressing a group of young listeners. "But humility and love can heal even the deepest wounds. Lila and Aria have shown us that redemption is always possible, and that true beauty comes from within." The children nodded solemnly, their wide eyes taking in the lesson. The story of Lila, Aria, and the magical pendant would live on in Elukwi, not as a tale of magic, but as a parable about the strength of the human spirit. A bright future. As the celebration wound down and the stars filled the sky, Lila and Kale stood at the edge of the square, watching the villagers dance and laugh. Aria joined them, a soft smile on her face. "You're going to be so happy, Lila," Aria said, her voice filled with warmth. "Kale's a good man, and you deserve all the joy in the world." Lila squeezed her sister's hand. "And so do you, Aria. We both do." The three of them stood together, united by love and resilience, looking toward a future filled with hope. The final message. The story of Lila and Aria, of jealousy and forgiveness, of self-discovery and redemption, ended not with magic, but with love. It was a reminder that while beauty fades, the kindness and integrity we cultivate endure. True beauty lies not in what others see, but in how we choose to live, and it shines brightest in those who embrace compassion and humility. As the night deepened, the village of Elukwi hummed with life, its people carrying forward the lessons of the sisters' journey, ready to build a brighter tomorrow.